Gloria Velez, the infamous book author and Joe Budden ex-girlfriend, recently responded to his remarks he made about her on his podcast in the following Instagram caption. Imagine clowning someone's survival story without even reading it. My autobiography isn't a tell-all or a tally sheet. It's about my life, family, trauma, survival, growth, and everything I fought through. To spin it like I was with 9 million dudes is dismissive, corny, and exactly why I had to write this book. People love to reduce me to rumors or half-truths instead of the reality. I gave grace in my writing. I spoke facts. The relationships mentioned are just part of my journey, not the whole story. But when people can't handle accountability, they turn truth into jokes. That's on them. My story is mine, and it's bigger than any punchline. That is where Gloria Velez finds herself, standing in the light of her own narrative, insisting on the sanctity of her story in a world that would rather flatten it into gossip. What she names is something that runs deep through the American vein, the need to possess the stories of others, to shape them to our amusement, to make the pain of women a kind of public property. Especially the pain of women who have lived visibly, who have walked the fine edge between desire and judgment, between myth and truth. For years, Velez's name was a fixture in the margins of someone else's fame. She was the girl in the video, the former partner of a man more publicly lauded, the rumor whispered in online forums. And yet behind that shadowed version of her life was a person, a mother, a survivor, a human being who carried her own scars and victories. Her statement arrives not as a burst of anger, but as reclamation. She speaks with the authority of someone who has endured misrepresentation so long that she has learned its grammar. She understands the way a man's words can shrink her life to a punchline, how the world is trained to laugh along, to absorb the diminishment as entertainment. There is a particular cruelty in that, the casualness with which people can erase your humanity while smiling. What Velez demands, what she asserts in that breath, is the right to complexity. The right to tell her story without having it ridiculed into simplicity. Every generation of Black and Latino women who enter the public eye inherit this same fight. The battle is never just about image, it's about existence. The gaze that consumes them is not neutral. It carries centuries of assumptions about purity, desirability, and worth. The same culture that once made commodities of women's bodies now trades in digital fragments of their lives, turning personal pain into currency. And so, when a woman like Velez writes of her family, her trauma, her growth, she is not only narrating her life, she is resisting erasure. She is refusing the old order that says her story only matters when filtered through the eyes of men. I think often of what it means to live as a public memory. The media world, like the world before it, feeds on spectacle. It demands confession but offers no sanctuary. It celebrates exposure and then punishes those who dare to be visible. For women, particularly those who came up in hip-hop's early visual culture, the cost of fame was always double. They were icons of beauty, and yet targets of suspicion, admired and condemned in the same breath. They built careers in spaces that desired them but did not respect them, that used their presence as ornament and their silence as consent. To speak now, after so many years of caricature, is an act of courage, is to break the spell of other people's imagination. Velez's words arrive like a mirror turned back on the audience. She reminds the world that there is a difference between a story told and a story lived. Her life was not a list of men, but a chronicle of endurance. Her autobiography, she tells us through her posture and resolve, is not about tabloid arithmetic. It is about the bruises one carries unseen, the beauty of rebuilding after collapse, the power of forgiving oneself for surviving. And yet, in responding to the public remarks made about her, she also exposes a broader cultural sickness, the way we trivialize survival when it comes from a woman we once objectified. There is a deep irony in this. The same culture that consumes women's trauma in television dramas, in music, in literature, still mocks it when it comes from real mouths. We are comfortable with pain only when it is aesthetic, only when it stays inside the lines drawn by men. When women claim ownership of that pain, when they refuse to apologize for the messiness of healing, they are often met with ridicule disguised as humor. The impulse to clown, to reduce, to joke, it's a way of refusing to look at the truth too long. Because the truth implicates us. The truth asks uncomfortable questions. How do we treat the women who helped build the culture we love? How do we consume their images but ignore their humanity? How many times have we laughed at someone's survival story because it was easier than acknowledging our own cruelty? This, to me, is what lies beneath her statement. Is not simply a defense, is a diagnosis. She is naming the rot in a culture that confuses mockery with commentary. She is pointing to the ease with which empathy is lost in the age of content. And by asserting that her story is bigger than any punchline, she is reaching for something sacred, the right to narrate one's life without permission, without apology. Every time a woman like her speaks, she extends the lineage of truth-tellers who refused invisibility. I think of the foremothers who wrote in defiance, Zora, Audrey, Maya, each reclaiming their bodies, their pain, their narrative. They too were mocked by the public gaze, accused of excess, of bitterness, of self-absorption. But in their words we found a map, a way of remembering ourselves outside the caricatures drawn for us. Veles, knowingly or not, walks that same path. Her insistence on being seen in full is an inheritance of that tradition. What she demands is not sympathy, but recognition. Recognition that a woman's story cannot be reduced to who she loved or who left her. Recognition that survival is not entertainment. Recognition that grace, when offered by someone who has suffered, is not weakness, but strength refined by fire. She says she gave grace in her writing. That small phrase is heavy with wisdom. Because to give grace to those who have wronged you is to understand that anger alone cannot build a future. It is to release yourself from the machinery of bitterness. Still, grace does not mean silence. It does not mean permission. It is possible to forgive and still confront, to write from love and still demand accountability. This is the balance Veles embodies, a refusal to let compassion erase truth. Her statement pulses with that dual energy, mercy and defiance intertwined. The world rarely knows what to do with that kind of woman. We are trained to celebrate resilience only after it has been sanitized, once the woman has aged out of desirability, once her defiance no longer threatens the comfort of men. But Veles is speaking now, while still luminous, still remembered, still complicated. She refuses to fade quietly into nostalgia. In doing so, she reclaims a different kind of power, not the power of fame, but of authorship. Authorship is everything. To tell one's own story is to seize the means of interpretation. For too long, the stories of women in hip-hop have been told by others, producers, journalists, lovers. Rarely do they get to frame their lives beyond the aesthetics of the video or the scandal of a relationship. By writing her life, Veles joins the growing number of women who understand that documentation is liberation. To write is to exist beyond rumor. To write is to say, "You will not define me by what you heard. You will see me as I was, as I am, as I chose to be." There comes a time in every person's journey when silence begins to ache. When the body remembers everything the world told it to forget, and the spirit grows weary of translation. The hunger to be understood becomes a kind of rebellion. And so, her post is more than a rebuttal. It is a declaration of sovereignty. It says simply, "I own my story." And in that ownership lies the quiet revolution that every marginalized storyteller dreams of, the freedom to live unshrunk.